Gary Hood, a cattle farmer, just approached his own farm when he heard his workers screaming. Cattleman Stephen ran out to him with pitchforks in his hands and tossed them aside. "Gary, where did you get that monster? He won't let anybody near him. You can't even get near him." "Stephen, this is the first time you've seen a breeding bull," said Gary. "Like children, I swear." "Go and see for yourself. It is not a bull, it is a monster. He might get your belly kicked in with his horns." "No, I'm not going to look after him. I still value my life. That's the second stall he's broken." Leighton wanted to give him some hay, but he shook his horn so hard that he flew sideways, broke his head. "I let him go home. Might have to go to the hospital." Gary frowned and went into the barn, where a young breeding bull, bald and round-headed, had been brought in the other day. He was praised as a good producer, and Gary agreed to the expensive purchase, especially since he didn't have a normal bull in his herd. But if he keeps going the way Stephen says it is, we'll have to send the bull to the slaughterhouse. It's no good if no one can take care of him. It's a shame to lose that kind of money, but there's nothing he can do about it. Gary walked into the barn and froze with fright and delight when he saw the huge beast, flaring its large nostrils. "Well, what are you doing here?" Gary said to him. "You're scaring all my workers away. Somebody's got to feed you, give you water, clean you up after all." The bull looked at his master with bloodshot eyes and roared loudly, and then yanked his head so hard that he almost tore the chains he was tied with. Gary involuntarily recoiled and then hurried out of the stable. "I don't know what to do," he said as he walked closer to Stephen, who was sitting on some log. "I spent so much money on him, and now it looks like I threw him away. How can I let him out into the herd? He'd do a lot of damage." "That's what I'm telling you," Stephen agreed. "Well, let's see a few more days. Maybe he'll get used to it. And if not, we'll have to send him to the slaughterhouse. Now I'm going to check on Leighton, see if it's serious." Gary, upset by what had happened, went to the car, and in a minute it roared and turned in the direction of the village. Leighton's wife greeted Gary with shouts. "What on earth is this? And if I lost my husband, who would help me raise my children then?" Gary looked at Leighton, motionless on the couch. "What's the matter with him?" he asked his wife. "Did you call an ambulance?" "He didn't call an ambulance. He was drunk with fear. He said that your bull almost trampled him." The poor fellow was frightened. Gary secretly took a breath. "Well, thank God, and I thought, here you go." He handed his wife Leighton some bills, and she very cleverly hid them in a pocket of her apron. "Fix up your husband and let him go to work tomorrow." Of course," said the woman, pleased with the unexpected money. "Sure he will. Gary, don't even doubt it. I'll chase him from the early morning. Just let him sleep it off." Gary grinned and went out of Leighton's house, breathing in the fresh country air with pleasure. Actually, he had become a villager not so long ago, only about 7 years ago. He simply decided one day to leave the crowded and hectic city and settle in the countryside, in the house where his wife's parents, Ellen, had once lived. At one time, they had farmed, but when they grew old, there was no more energy left, and the large farm had fallen into disrepair. Of course, Ellen herself didn't even think about going back to the village where she grew up. She liked the comfortable city life, but her husband managed to change her mind, although it took almost 6 months. In the end, the couple sold 2 apartments and invested all the money in the development of their farm, the remnants of which they inherited from their elders. Ellen and Gary's son Arthur was particularly excited about country life. He loved everything in the countryside: the air, the open space, the river, the people. And when his father gave Arthur a sheepdog, the boy almost went crazy with joy. From the first day, Alf was his faithful friend and never parted with his master. And so their life went on, year by year, giving little joy. Arthur grew up and began to help his father in everything, not even dreaming of another fate. The only thing Arthur wanted was to meet a girl who would share his love for a simple, unpretentious life full of work, peace, and simple family happiness among family and friends. Where would you find one now? Gary shook his head, listening to Arthur's arguments. Now, all the girls dream of a different life. They like to spend time in spas, relax in resorts, have fun, and do nothing. No, Daddy, I don't want a girl like that. My dream is to meet a girl like our mother, beautiful, kind, and faithful. That she would follow me anywhere, like Mom followed you here in the village. And anyway, is it bad here? I just love our family dinners outdoors. It's so wonderful." "Son," smiled Gary, "maybe you should think about the city after all. Get a good profession and stay in the city to live. No, Dad, it's not for me. You see, I live by farming and I'm good at it. Son, we worry about you, sighed Ellen, who was present when this happened. And me and Dad, and even your dog Alf. Why don't you at least try it? See if you like city life. Why try, Mommy? I've already made up my mind. Yes, I could not save money to go to Europe by farming, but I do not need it. Arthur hugged her. Leave him alone, Eli, shook his head Gary. You know our son. Once he's got something in his head, there's nothing you can do to get it out. What makes him so stubborn? Really? Ellen sighed sadly, looking at her husband with a slight reproach. You look at each other like in a mirror. You're the same in appearance and character. Yes, and I am proud of it. The father smiled, patting his son on the shoulder. But very soon, he had to really confront Arthur's character, and a real war almost broke out at home. One day, Arthur came home and declared that he wanted to get married. Crazy! Ellen splashed her hands. Father, listen to what he has made up. Really, Arthur, what kind of a joke is this? Gary frowned. I'm not going to make jokes, Dad. Arthur looked serious, and his parents were embarrassed to realize that he really meant what he said. So, who's your lucky lady of honor? Gary asked mockingly. As far as I remember, you never went out with anybody. You spent all your evenings at home. Did you find love on the internet? No, Dad. I picked her up at the junkyard, Arthur said in all seriousness. Remember 3 days ago you asked me to take out the trash? I did as you asked. And I found a girl there. Her name is Lana. Son, honey, I don't understand, Ellen said. Do you really want to marry some bum? Was that what Lana was doing there? Mom, you won't believe it. She's been living there for 2 weeks, in an old wooden carriage that someone threw away. How old is she? Gary asked. She's the same age as me. I'm only a few hours older than her. Amazing, isn't it? It turns out that we were born on the same day. That's not what's surprising, Ellen exclaimed. I'm surprised at the recklessness you've decided to do. Do you really want to bring that beggar girl here? Arthur, come to your senses. She must have a family somewhere, and if she doesn't want to live with them, and maybe they don't want to live with her, there's a good reason for that. Did you find out why she's homeless? Yes, Mom, I did. Lana was very young when her father died. Her mother remarried and lived with her new husband for almost 7 years. He was a bad man and treated Lana and her mother disgustingly. They were nothing but labor for him, a free servant. Lana was barely 14 when her mother passed away. From then on, Lana grew up with her stepfather and stepmother, whom he immediately brought into the house. By the way, they kicked Lana out of the house. She lived in a warm barn where her stepfather gave her a tiny little room. Lana took care of the cattle and poultry, worked in the vegetable garden, and generally did all the dirty work around the house. In return, they fed her and sometimes brought her some clothes. But mostly, she only wore what the neighbors gave her. They used to bring her children's rags. Look, none of this can be true. Gary brushed it aside. This is the 21st century, and slavery was abolished long ago. If your Lana put up with that kind of treatment and didn't complain, she's just stupid. And it's not worth talking about anymore, so a wedding is out of the question. Daddy, I'm not going to have some special party. Lana and I are just getting married, and she's going to live here. No, she won't, at least as your wife. If you want, we'll let her stay here with us, but just as a tenant. See her for at least 2 years, and if you don't change your mind, we'll agree to your marriage. Dad, I don't need your consent. I've already made up my mind, and I'm going to do it my way. This house belongs not only to you, but also to me, and Lana will be my wife here. No, she will not. Gary slammed his fist on the table with force. As long as I am the master here, and everything will be as I say. Arthur got up silently, walked over to his father, and looked him straight in the eye. Ellen gasped as she saw in front of her not husband and son, but 2 grown men ready to confront each other. Stop it now, she demanded, stepping between them. Arthur, Gary, let's talk calmly. I've already said everything, Gary gritted through his teeth. And so do I, Arthur replied in tone with him. And if you don't like my choice, you can only accept it. Otherwise, instead of gaining a daughter, you will lose a son. The room was so tense that all 3 of them didn't notice when a thin, maidenish figure appeared in the doorway. Only when she spoke did everyone turn to her, surprised by the presence of the unexpected guest. Arthur, don't talk to your parents like that, Lana asked. They don't know me at all, and their fears are understandable. Thank you for being kind to me, but we can't see each other anymore. Mom, Dad, this is the Lana I told you about. The stunned parents looked at the girl and didn't say a word. Then Arthur walked up to her and took her hand. Come, my love, since you and I are not welcome here, we will find a place to live. He headed for the threshold, but Ellen rushed to him. Son, don't say that. I don't want you to go. To go. The desperate woman looked at her husband. Gary, what are you? Let him do what he wants, waved his hand Gary. After all, it really is his life. Soon, Gary and Lana were married. There was no celebration. Ellen just set the table and they celebrated with the family. A few weeks later, Arthur won a grant to study agronomy in a year-long program. He flew away and Lana stayed at Gary and Ellen's house to wait for her husband to return. Ellen at least tried to put up with her daughter-in-law's presence, which wasn't hard at all. Quiet, calm, hard-working Lana grabbed for any job. She could do everything, only, as she herself admitted, she did not learn how to cook. They never let me in the kitchen, she told Ellen. I did most of the housework, and when my mother was alive, I was too young to stand at the stove. That's all right, I'll teach you if you want, Ellen answered, conciliatorily. I would like to, rejoiced Lana. When Ellen was alone with her husband, she told him, unconcealing her amazement. You know, I like this girl. She's so kind and caring, and she can literally do everything. You don't even have to ask her. She sees everything herself. Before I even think about sweeping the floor or washing the dishes, she's already doing it. Yeah, I can see that, Gary said. And it struck me that Alf recognized her so easily. You know, he doesn't let anyone near him but Arthur, and he's fondling Lana as if she were his mistress. You know what else I'll tell you? Ellen whispered confidently to her husband. I saw Lana eating pickles the other day, and I asked her if she was expecting a baby. And she smiled and told me that she and Arthur never had anything. Can you believe they didn't sleep together? Well, nothing happened between them. Why? Gary wondered. After all, they were married, even though it happened so ridiculously. That's what I asked her. She told me that they knew each other too little, and she wouldn't let him do anything. So it's okay to marry someone you don't know well, and you can't do anything else? Gary was confused by this information. Lana said Arthur took pity on her. He wanted to keep her safe until he came back. Do you understand what he did? I think I do now. Gary nodded. He had been a little softer on Lana since that day, but the bull story had turned everything upside down again. Back home from the farm, Gary told his wife and daughter-in-law about his unfortunate acquisition. And the bull was so handsome. He was chocolate-colored, but his head was white, as if he didn't have enough brown paint on it. His owner, a lousy man by the way, when he sold him to me, said the bull was a little wild, and the name is kinda silly, Fert, but he does not respond to it. Well, I gave the cattleman a few days to look at this Fert, and if it does not work out, I will send him to the slaughterhouse. Lana listened to her father-in-law attentively, but said nothing. Only when she heard about the slaughterhouse did her eyes sparkle. But neither Ellen nor Gary paid any attention to it. But at night, Gary heard the front door slam softly, and he got up on his bed, surprised. Ellen was asleep next to him, which meant that only Lana could have left the house. So clever, thought Gary, and quickly got dressed, determined to find out where his daughter-in-law was running off to at night. Could it be that she had an affair on the side? And now she deceives Arthur and him with Ellen, pretending to be nice by day and showing her whole being at night. Gary's amazement was boundless when he realized that Lana was running away to the farm. Had she really gotten mixed up with his cattlemen and been running out to see them at night? What a disgrace. Well, I'll see what I can find out and get this scoundrel out in the open. Gary spoke softly and added to his pace when he noticed that Lana had already disappeared into the stable, where there was that huge bull which everybody was afraid of. An enraged Gary opened the door and was dumbfounded to see Lana hugging the bull's head to her chest. Fert, my darling, my darling. The girl whispered, feeding the beast a loaf of bread, and he carefully took pieces from her palms, snorting with pleasure. What is it? Gary couldn't stand it and came closer to her daughter-in-law and her pet. Gary, honey, that's my Fert. That's what I called him. You bought him from my stepfather, didn't you? George Flowers? Yes, only I didn't know he was your stepfather. When our mayor brought Fert in, he was all weak, and my stepfather ordered me to get rid of him, slaughter him, and feed him to the dogs, and I wouldn't let him. I begged him to let me keep the calf. I don't know why, but my stepfather left me. I watered Furt from a bottle, spent days and nights with him, taking care of him. And look how handsome he grew up. And then, when my stepfather kicked me out of the house, I had to leave my pet behind. Well, I couldn't take him with me. Furt was bored, didn't listen to anyone. And then I understood my stepfather decided to sell him. I heard your story today, and I knew it was about my bull. So I came here to make sure. The girl suddenly turned and fell to her knees in front of Gary. Please don't give him to the slaughterhouse. He is kind and good, and I will take care of him myself. That's all I need, Gary grumbled, lifting the daughter-in-law off his knees. Don't worry, I'll keep your strange pet. Only you, please teach my cattleman how to look after him. I really can't have you wielding pitchforks here by yourself. It will be enough if you just visit him. The contested bull breathed noisily through his huge nostrils and petted the girl like a kitten. Yes, Lana, you never cease to amaze me. Gary shook his head. Listen, may I pet him? Sure, laughed the girl. You'll know at once how affectionate he is. I hope so, smiled Gary too. The year of training flew by unnoticed, and Arthur returned home, where his friendly family was waiting for him. When the initial excitement of the meeting subsided, Gary took his son aside and said, hugging him, Thank you, son, for such a daughter-in-law. Your Lana is gold, and you will be as happy with her as I was with your mother. Remember I told you that story about the bull? Sure, Furt is a strange dowry, but he really did set us up for gold. The cows give birth to calves so strong, they're a sight to behold. I hope you and Lana will give me grandchildren as healthy and cheerful as Furt is. Don't even doubt it, Daddy. Arthur playfully patted his father on the shoulder. I won't lose face. Arthur kept his word, and a year later, the whole family came into the maternity hospital to pick up Lana and the two strong, healthy twin sons that she gave to her beloved husband. Arthur was incredibly proud and happy that his parents shared his joy. They were now certain that her dream of a large and close-knit family had come true.